Have you ever loved someone so much that you were willing to stay silent for 10 years, just because of a promise? I did. Those 10 years were not time, they were a sentence. In that sentence, I, Maureen O'Hara, the queen of Technicolor, lived in brilliant frames, but my heart was silent and lonely. I believed, I promised, I waited. But love, if misplaced, can become shackles. I lived with the man I loved the most, who also hurt me the most. No one asked. No one dared. I was too proud to be pitied. And the press? They smeared, made headlines, made me a failure in marriage. I didn't cry. I didn't get angry. I got up. Every time I returned to cinema, I saved myself. Because otherwise, I would have let that pain kill me with oblivion. If you've ever known that feeling, hiding pain behind a halo, then you understand me. This is not a tragedy. This is survival. If you find this story touching, please like, subscribe, and share to spread the power of proud women like Maureen O'Hara. Do you remember those quiet Saturday nights, when the black and white TV flickered in the small living room, when the whole family was silent as if holding their breath, gathered around a world that was only black and white but contained all the colors of memory? When the first notes of Miracle on 34th Street sounded, or when, in the fog of Ireland, a woman rode across the screen on horseback in The Quiet Man, that was Maureen O'Hara. I remember clearly the first time I saw her. Her red hair like fire burning in the night, her eyes, not eyes that spoke, but eyes that challenged. Proud, unbowed, and her voice, strong, unwavering, unprotected. Maureen was more than just a movie star. She was the image of an era, when cinema still smelled of celluloid, and the Hollywood dream had not yet been diluted by reality. People call her the queen of Technicolor, but I've always believed that what made her shine wasn't the technology. It was her charisma. When she appeared, she didn't just light up the screen, she took it. With a charisma that couldn't be learned, couldn't be faked, couldn't be duplicated. But Maureen wasn't just pretty. She refused to accept the stereotypical roles of women waiting to be saved. She chose pain, chose the inner self, chose women who could endure without breaking their dignity. In the 1940s and 1950s, when Hollywood was still unfamiliar with women's voices, Maureen dared to be different. She wouldn't let anyone mold her into a digestible stereotype. She lived her truth, fiercely and with courage. For American audiences, Maureen is a part of their childhood memories, the embodiment of family values, of courage, of innocent Christmases and wordless dreams. But for Maureen herself, the spotlight was only half the story. Behind the scenes, there was a woman who knew how to endure, how to be silent, and also how to suppress all the pain. Maureen Fitzsimons was born on August 17, 1920, in Dublin, Ireland, not in luxury, but in a modest home where there were more books than comforts. Her father, Charles, was a footballer and businessman, and her mother, Margaret, was an opera singer who had failed to fulfill her dream of being on stage. In a family of 6 children, Maureen stood out not only for her looks, but for her relentless will. From a young age, she loved the stage. Not for the lights, but for the feeling of being real, not bound by the conventions of everyday life. Her mother taught her to trust her emotions. Her father taught her to be a man. And Maureen grew up between these two worlds, romantic and rational, gentle and tough. It was as if she herself was born to become the image of an era that refused to be forgotten. And though the glory may fade with the years, her memory is still there. Dark, burning and irreplaceable. I used to think that if I was strong enough, resilient enough, no harm would be able to touch me. But I was wrong. From foggy Dublin, I stepped into London, and then one day, set foot in Hollywood, before I was even in my 20s. Alone in the city of lights and illusions, I had only my Catholic faith and the memory of a warm family to cling to. Then I met Will Price. A smart, funny director, and I believed, truly believed, that he understood me. We married in 1941. 3 years later, Bronwyn was born. She was my only light for many years after that. But love could not save a man who felt small next to his wife's success. Will started drinking. Not for fun. But to escape. To kill his jealousy. And then, every night in that seemingly splendid house, was a mental torture. Who do you think you are that people worship you like that? He once roared, his breath reeking of alcohol, when Bronwyn was sleeping just a wall away. No, he didn't hit me. He didn't need to. The words were as cold as knives, each sentence drowning me in humiliation. Ice statue, he called me that. A person who doesn't know how to love, doesn't know how to live. Even my career, which I built with all my soul, became a reason for his contempt. And me? Every time I stepped onto the set, I was a woman riding a horse, confronting John Wayne, running through a snowstorm as if nothing could knock me down. But when night fell, in the small kitchen, I wiped my tears alone, not because he hit me, but because I realized I had become too strong for the very person I once wanted to be weak beside. I once said, I can be strong in front of the whole world, but every time I come home, I just want to be a normal wife. That dream, I never reached it. People look at me on screen, praising me as a heroine. But my biggest enemy in life is not a character in the movie. It is a man who once called me baby. And that dark chapter I lived through. No one knew. No one dared to ask. Because I was too proud to complain. But now, I tell it. Not to seek pity, but to let people like me know that you are not alone. And sometimes, surviving is the greatest victory. Maureen O'Hara, who once confronted Hollywood, dared to argue with directors, confront co-stars, perform her own action scenes without a body double, could not escape the marriage that was killing her every day. Why didn't she leave? Because of her faith. Because of her vow to God. Because she was Maureen O'Hara, a woman who never ran away. She stayed for her daughter, for her honor, for the fear of being seen as a failed wife. And so, each day that passed, she swallowed her tears, raised her head, and continued to play the role of a happy wife, not on screen, but in her own life. Someone would say, I would have left him a long time ago. But not everyone understood the invisible shackles of women like her. She endured 10 years of living like a prisoner in the house she built. And then, on their 10th wedding anniversary, he left her divorce papers, walking out of her life as if he had never promised anything. Not a goodbye. Not a hug for her daughter. Not a backward glance. She didn't cry in public. No lawsuit. No tragedy exposed in the newspapers. She just quietly signed the paper, and returned to the set, where she still smiled as if her heart had never been broken. But do you know how many women have lived like that? Living behind a strong mask, when at night there are only sighs? Waking up in the morning still having to smile, still having to be a mother, a wife, a keeper of the family fire, even though inside you are fading like a candle with no wax? Maybe you have been there too. Maybe you are quietly reading these lines, and suddenly see yourself somewhere in that story. If so, you are not alone. Maureen O'Hara once walked away from the house she once called home. Once looked back at a familiar room and no longer felt like she belonged there. And if you are doing that today, you are not weak. You are surviving, like Maureen. After all, after the glorious roles, the long nights of tears, and a heart that had been crushed by a wrong love, I left Hollywood. No farewell press conference. No lights, no trumpets. I just quietly packed up what was left of me and my daughter, and left. To Idaho, then Arizona, places far from the bright streets, where people didn't call me a star, but just a woman who grew flowers on the porch. My last house in Boise, small, peaceful, no pool, no bodyguard, no trace of the old days. Just a small garden, some lavender, a wooden chair facing the sunset, and an old typewriter, where I wrote the last lines of my memoir, as if to myself, you're all over it, Maureen. I didn't leave behind a huge fortune. I didn't need to. I left Bronwyn a quiet life. The rest, the red dress from the quiet man, the painting John Wayne had painted for me, the Bible that sat on my bedside table every night, were sent back to my homeland, Ireland. No one fought over it. No one cried in the papers. No one broke in to steal the past. Only I, the woman who had once taken Hollywood by storm, left this world in absolute silence. No lights. No applause. And strangely enough, it was that silence that people remembered forever. Because finally, I was able to live as myself, not a role, not an icon, just a woman who had loved, who had hurt, who had stood up, and who had gone through it all. Now that the applause has died down, let's take a moment to look back. Not just the roles I've played, but what I left behind in the world, not fame, but a mark. On the silver screen, I was no ordinary star. I was a red wind, wild, proud, blowing through the golden age of cinema. When women of my generation were written for roles that made them smile, cry, and depend on others, I rode horses, shot guns, and confronted men without needing to be rescued. The Quiet Man, Rio Grande, Miracle on 34th Street. Each role was not just a job, but a piece of my life. People watched the movie and thought I was acting. But in fact, I was living. Every glance, every tilt of the head, every decisive line, was me. So real that people were left silent. In awe. Or in awe. I stood next to great names, John Ford, Alfred Hitchcock, John Wayne. But I never backed down. Wayne once said, Maureen didn't need me to be famous. But I couldn't have made The Quiet Man without her. That's not a compliment. It's the truth. I didn't need scandal. I didn't need staging. I just needed one thing, to be myself. And that's what made me a legend, in a quiet but indelible way. But that's why I've been lonely. Because the higher you fly, the harder it is to find a hand brave enough to hold you when the lights go out. They love my image, but few dare to step into my truth. I am Maureen O'Hara. Not because I'm beautiful, but because I'm real. And sometimes, the truth, nothing more, is enough to make history. Then the storm hit. Not on screen, in real life. And it dragged me to the brink of a deep abyss, where honor was tainted not by bullets, but by vicious words. Hollywood, 1957. I was at my peak. One of the most powerful stars of the Technicolor age. But I was a woman. And worse, I was a woman who refused to bow. In a world where men dictated the rules and women were expected to keep quiet, Maureen O'Hara had become a thorn in their side. And then Confidential struck. A notorious tabloid, a slanderer and a libeler, accused me of indecent behavior with a man in Hollywood's Chinese theater. The slander, filthy, full of innuendo, was written not to inform, but to destroy. I could have kept quiet, like everyone else. But I was not born to be buried in a shame I did not create. I filed a lawsuit. I stood in front of the court. I looked them straight in the eye and said, I am not just an actor. I am a human being. And I will not let anyone smear my reputation. I proved, with papers, with witnesses, that at the time of the accusations, I was in Spain, filming Fire Over Africa, halfway around the world from Hollywood. The lawsuit was not just a fight for me. It was a declaration of war against the system. A punch in the face of the misogynistic media. And it opened the way. After me, a series of other stars stood up. The courtroom became a court of 100 stars. Confidential reeled. Reputations collapsed. They were sued one after another. And I did not need a verdict. The public had already drawn a conclusion. I was the winner. Not because I was beautiful or famous, but because I dared to do what an entire industry has forced women to avoid: tell the truth. If I was a part of your childhood, if you ever sat with your parents watching The Quiet Man or Miracle on 34th Street, remember, I wasn't just the woman on screen. I was the woman in real life who stood up when everyone else told me to stay down. And sometimes it's the memories you hold in your heart, not the statues or the trophies, that make you immortal.